September 1942. Stalingrad is burning. The German Sixth Army controls 90% of the city. 26 men died trying to reach one 4-story apartment building. 4 survive. Their sergeant, a 24-year-old peasant farmer, refuses to retreat. For 60 days, he holds that building against an entire army. This is the story of Yakov Pavlov. The battle for Stalingrad. By late summer 1942, the German Wehrmacht had pushed deep into the Soviet Union. Hitler wanted Stalingrad for 3 reasons. It was a major industrial city building tanks that went straight to the front lines, sometimes without even being painted. It controlled the Volga River, the Soviet Union's critical supply artery, and it carried Stalin's name. Taking it would humiliate the Soviet leader personally. General Friedrich Paulus commanded the German Sixth Army, over 290,000 men, hundreds of tanks, and complete air superiority. By September, the Germans controlled 90% of Stalingrad. The city was rubble. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to skeletal ruins. Civilians who hadn't evacuated, 500,000 of them, mostly women and children, hid in basements while artillery shells screamed overhead. Soviet forces clung to a narrow strip along the Volga River. If the Germans reached the river, Stalingrad would fall, and if Stalingrad fell, the entire southern front might collapse. In this nightmare, one building would become a fortress, and one sergeant would become a legend. The mission: retake the building. On September 27, 1942, Colonel Yellin of the 42nd Guards Rifle Regiment gave an order. A 4-story apartment building overlooking 9th of January Square had just been captured by German forces. It had to be retaken immediately. The building was strategically critical. It sat perpendicular to the Volga embankment, giving clear sight lines north, south, and west for over 1 kilometer. Whoever controlled that building controlled the approaches to the river. A 30-man platoon was ordered to retake it. The platoon's lieutenant was already dead. The senior sergeants were wounded or killed. Command fell to 24-year-old junior sergeant Yakov Fedotovich Pavlov, a peasant farmer from the village of Krestovaya who had joined the Red Army in 1938. Pavlov and his men advanced across open ground under German fire. 26 men were killed before they even reached the building. Machine guns, artillery, mortar fire, bodies dropped in the rubble-filled streets. Only 4 men reached the building alive. Pavlov and 3 others. They stormed inside. Fierce close-quarters fighting. Germans in the stairwells and rooms. Hand-to-hand combat with rifles, bayonets, and grenades. When the shooting stopped, Pavlov's men controlled the building. Inside the basement, they found Russian prisoners of war and 10 terrified civilians, women and children with nowhere else to go. Pavlov's orders were simple. Hold the building. Do not let the Germans reach the river. Hold until death. Turning an apartment into a fortress. Pavlov knew the Germans would counterattack. He had hours, maybe minutes. He ordered his surviving men to fortify every entrance. They bricked up windows, leaving narrow firing slits for machine guns. They breached walls in the basement and upper floors for internal movement. They dug a communications trench back to Soviet lines. After several days, reinforcements arrived. Lieutenant Ivan Afanasyev led 26 more soldiers carrying machine guns, anti-tank rifles, mortars, and ammunition. The garrison now numbered around 25 combat-effective soldiers. Afanasyev technically assumed command, but the building would forever bear Pavlov's name. Following Stalin's Order No. 227, not one step back, Pavlov ordered the building surrounded with 4 layers of barbed wire and minefields. Machine gun posts were set up in every window facing the square. On the roof, Pavlov mounted a PTRS-41 anti-tank rifle. He discovered it was devastatingly effective against German tanks. When tanks approached the building, their thin turret roof armor became exposed. Pavlov's men fired down from above. The tanks couldn't elevate their guns high enough to shoot back. The building became a killing zone. 60 days of hell. For the next 60 days, from September 27th to November 25th, the Germans attacked Pavlov's house multiple times every single day. Infantry charges across 9th of January Square, tank assaults, artillery bombardments, Luftwaffe bombing runs. Every time German soldiers tried to cross the open square, Pavlov's men unleashed withering machine gun fire, anti-tank rifle rounds, and mortar shells. The Germans were forced to attack across open ground with no cover. They were slaughtered. Vasily Chukov, commanding general of Soviet forces in Stalingrad, later joked that the Germans lost more men trying to take Pavlov's house than they lost taking Paris. The joke wasn't far from truth. France resisted Nazi Germany for 43 days before surrendering. Pavlov's house held for 58 days with 25 men. German maps labeled the building Festung, fortress. They grossly overestimated the number of defenders based on the ferocity of resistance. German commanders thought hundreds of soldiers must be inside. There were 24. Conditions inside were unbearable. There were no beds. Soldiers slept on insulation wool torn from pipes. The Germans fired harassing artillery all night to prevent sleep. Food was scarce. Water was worse. During lulls in fighting, Pavlov's men had to run outside and kick over piles of German corpses. The bodies were stacking so high they blocked firing lanes. In the basement, 10 civilians, women and children, lived through the entire siege. Trapped, terrified, listening to explosions and gunfire every hour of every day. 3 defenders were killed during the 2 months: Lieutenant Chernyshenko, Sergeant Haight, and Private Svirin. Both Pavlov and Afanasyev were wounded but survived. The building took direct hits. Bombs destroyed walls. Artillery blew holes in the structure, but the defenders never retreated. Not one step back. The turning point. While Pavlov held his house, the larger Battle of Stalingrad raged around him. In November 1942, the Soviet Union launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive that encircled the entire German 6th Army. 290,000 German soldiers were trapped inside Stalingrad. On November 25th, Soviet forces relieved Pavlov's house. The defenders were finally evacuated across the Volga to safety. But the battle wasn't over. For 3 more months, the encircled Germans endured a frozen hell. Temperatures dropped below zero. Food ran out. The Luftwaffe tried dropping supplies by air, but it wasn't enough. Thousands died from starvation, frostbite, and infection before combat even touched them. On February 2, 1943, Field Marshal Paulus surrendered. The 6th Army was destroyed. Of 91,000 German prisoners taken, only 5,000 to 6,000 ever returned home. The Battle of Stalingrad killed an estimated 1.1 million Soviet soldiers and 40,000 civilians. German and Axis forces lost over 800,000. It was the bloodiest battle in human history, and it was the turning point of World War II on the Eastern Front. From Stalingrad forward, the Germans would retreat all the way back to Berlin. The man who refused to die. Yakov Pavlov survived Stalingrad. He fought through the rest of the war on the 3rd Ukrainian and 2nd Belarusian fronts. He was present when Berlin fell in 1945. On June 27, 1945, Pavlov was awarded Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor for his defense of the house. After the war, Pavlov returned to Valdai in Novgorod Oblast. He joined the Communist Party. He served as district committee secretary. He was elected 3 times as deputy to the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. He married. He raised a family. He lived a quiet life. But he never forgot Stalingrad. He wrote memoirs about the battle. He made repeated visits to Volgograd, what Stalingrad was renamed after Stalin's death. He met with residents and preserved the memory of what happened there. Yakov Pavlov died on September 28, 1981. He was 63 years old. He was buried in Novgorod. The last surviving defender of Pavlov's house, Kamoljan Turganov from Uzbekistan, died in 2015 at age 93. A peasant farmer from an unknown village, 24 years old, 4 survivors out of 30, 60 days holding 1 building against the German 6th Army. More German casualties than taking Paris. Pavlov refused to die, refused to retreat, refused to surrender. He held that building until Stalingrad turned the war. That's the soldier who refused to die.